Welcome, everyone, to today's deep dive. We are setting out on a very specific mission today, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, me too. It is a dense one, but so worth it.
Right. So we're going to unpack a highly conceptual, yet, surprisingly practical document called the Spectrix Subtle Energy Cube version 1.0.
Authored by Dr. Carlton Johnson. He often goes by Doc C in his work.
Exactly. And our goal over this deep dive is to explore how humanity, basically across thousands of years, has described this really elusive thing, this thing we call life force or spiritual vitality.
Yeah, that invisible spark.
Right. But more importantly, we're going to look at how this specific text takes all those ancient, completely disparate descriptions and translates them into a single unified architectural model. And it does this without, and this is key, without erasing the cultural beauty of the original traditions.
Which is a massive undertaking.
It really is. I mean, think about it. Have you ever found yourself sitting in, say, a yoga class, listening to the instructor talk about cultivating your prana?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
Right. And then maybe later that exact same week, you are at an acupuncturist and they are talking to you about unblocking your cash tree.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday, you're in a religious setting and you are hearing about the spirit. And you just suddenly pause and wonder, are they all just pointing at the exact same invisible machinery?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because for thousands of years, across completely disconnected geographies, human beings have been trying to describe this exact vitality that animates the physical body.
Well, yeah, because it is the ultimate baseline mystery of human biology and consciousness, really. I mean, what fundamentally separates a living, breathing human being from a physical body that has literally just ceased to live?
The chemistry is the same.
Exactly. The chemical composition is momentarily identical, yet this animating principle, this subtle vitality, has just departed. Or, ceased to function.
Right. And because you can't just put that principle under a standard microscope and measure it objectively, every culture on Earth had to develop its own distinct vocabulary for it.
They had to map it using whatever metaphors they had around them. You see a lot of references to wind, breath, rivers, fire.
Which is beautiful,
Yeah.
but it creates this massive epistemological traffic jam for anyone trying to study it today.
Oh, a total bottleneck.
Right. You either find yourself drowning in this dense theological textbook where you feel like you need a PhD in comparative religion just to decode the first chapter.
Yeah, or you get the exact opposite.
The watered-down self-help manual.
Exactly. The generic, palatable manual that just strips away all the profound meaning.
Just totally flattens it.
Yeah.
But Dr. Johnson's model, the Spectrix Subtle Energy Cube, or the SEC, it takes a completely different approach. And I think to understand that approach, we actually have to look at the author himself.
Yeah, the author's background is, I'd say, the most critical lens through which to view this entire text.
Because he's not just a mystic on a mountain.
No, not at all. So he does hold a PhD in metaphysical science, which means he is intimately familiar with the philosophical, the immaterial side of things.
Right.
But his foundational professional background, like his Bachelor of Arts and his core career credentials, they are actually in accounting.
Wait, accounting?
Yes. He is a licensed public accountant and an accredited business advisor.
That is just such a jarring, brilliant collision of worlds.
It really is.
I mean, you have metaphysics, which is literally the study of the unmeasurable and the subjective, crashing headfirst into accounting, which is the ultimate rigid discipline of structural tracking and balancing the ledger.
An accountant looks at the universe and demands to see the balance sheet.
I love that. And you can see how that structural mindset completely informs his methodology here.
Oh, 100%. He approaches spirituality through the lens of systems thinking. The text makes it very clear that he just isn't satisfied with those poetic, vague descriptions of, good vibes or bad energy.
Right. He wants the schematics.
Exactly. He wants to define the structural systems. She's asking if this subtle vitality exists, where is it being held, what are the mechanisms moving it around, how is it regulated?
He's basically building a framework for energetic accounting.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And the origin story of how he actually built this framework is so uniquely 21st century. Because he didn't, lock himself in a monastery for a decade to meditate on this cube.
No, he initiated the whole process using artificial intelligence.
Which is wild. And he didn't just use it as a fancy search engine. He actually used an AI image generator called Night Cafe to create a visual metaphor before he even wrote the text.
Yeah, the document details this early rendering he generated. It was this luminous, transparent cube, and inside the boundaries of this rigid geometric shape, there were these complex branching pathways and organic living blossoms sort of emerging.
It's like the image itself was a hypothesis.
The text definitely treats it like a prophetic visual hypothesis. It instantly captured the core tension he was trying to resolve.
The tension between structure and flow.
Right. The rigid, containing structure of the cube versus the emergent, flowing vitality of those organic blossoms.
And then he took it a step further with large language models, right? He highlights an AI named Pi as a primary dialogue partner.
He did. He basically used the AI to process this massive foundational question. He wanted to know, are all these global descriptions of subtle energy inherently contradictory, or are they just localized translations of a common underlying reality?
I have to say, utilizing AI in this manner is a fascinating application of the technology.
Well, a large language model is, at its core, an incredibly sophisticated pattern recognition engine. It has ingested the vast corpus of human literature, global religious texts, philosophical treatises, all of it.
So it can see the connective tissue.
Exactly. By engaging the AI as a conversational sounding board, Dr. Johnson was able to map vectors and identify recurring functional patterns across disciplines that would honestly take a human researcher multiple lifetimes to cross-reference manually.
Okay, I have to pause here, though, because this methodology, it raises a massive red flag for me.
I can guess what it is, but go ahead.
I am deeply concerned about the danger of reductionism here. I mean, if we take these ancient, wonderfully complex traditions, early Christianity, Sufi mysticism, indigenous Lakota beliefs, Vedic Hinduism, and we just feed them into an AI pattern recognizer to extract a common denominator, don't we essentially destroy the cultures?
It's a very valid fear.
It just feels like taking a beautifully crafted 5-course meal, throwing it all into a blender and drinking it as a beige smoothie just for the raw caloric efficiency.
I love that analogy. But what's fascinating here is that the text is highly self-aware of that exact critique. It goes to great lengths to address it immediately in the opening chapters.
Oh, really? How so?
The author introduces this foundational philosophical concept. He calls it the spiritual prism. The stated purpose of the SEC model is never to collapse these rich traditions into a homogeneous sameness.
So it's not trying to say everyone actually believes the exact same thing.
No, the framework is not arguing that every religion is secretly teaching the exact same theology.
So how does the prism metaphor prevent that, cultural flattening?
Well, consider the physics of a literal optical prism. When a unified beam of white light strikes the glass, the structure of the prism bends that light, right? It separates it into a distinct spectrum of colors: red, blue, green.
Right. Pink Floyd album cover, basically.
Exactly. Now, if you observe the color red on the other side, you are not destroying the original white light, nor are you claiming that red is identical to blue.
Okay, I see where this is going.
You are merely recognizing that red and blue are different experiential frequencies that originated from the exact same unified source. The Spectrix framework applies this directly to human spirituality. It suggests that a single underlying reality of subtle vitality is being refracted through different cultural, geographical, and historical prisms.
That shifts the entire perspective for me. It means we aren't looking for theological consensus at all. We are looking for functional equivalence.
Yes.
We're just observing the behavior of the light, regardless of what color it currently is.
Functional equivalence is the perfect term. The methodology outlined in the text, which is observe, compare, translate, structure, it asks the reader to look at what the energy is actually doing within the human system.
Rather than what it's called.
Right. And by isolating these recurring functions, the text provides a meta-model. It allows you to navigate a modern world that is completely saturated with competing wellness advice and dogmas and medical interventions.
And you don't have to abandon your own cultural context to use it.
Exactly. You keep your context, but you gain the map.
So through this comparative lens, Dr. Johnson analyzed all this global data, and he discovered that all these descriptions of subtle energy can basically be categorized into 3 primary functional phases of his conceptual cube.
3 mechanisms that dictate how vitality operates.
Let's look at the first mechanism, because it tackles the most foundational physics question possible. If energy exists, where does it reside?
Right. So the framework categorizes this first function as containers. Chapter 4 of the text posits a universal observation. Across virtually every tradition studied, there is this implicit understanding that energy cannot simply exist in a vacuum.
It has to live somewhere.
It requires a context, a structure in which it is held and stabilized.
Which, if we map that onto the physical world, makes perfect sense. Energy is never just floating freely in empty space.
Right. Chemical energy is bound within the architecture of molecular bonds.
Exactly. Electrical potential requires a battery casing. Even gravitational energy is a function of planetary mass acting as a structural anchor.
So the framework is suggesting that subjective spiritual vitality obeys a parallel law of physics.
It is. But there's a crucial nuance the text introduces here. A container is never merely passive.
Meaning what, exactly?
It's not just an inert cardboard box that stores your vitality until you need it. A container actively informs, shapes, and constrains the energy it holds.
Oh, I see. Let me try to map that onto something relatable for everyone, like water.
Perfect. Water is the universal metaphor for life force.
Right. Water is life-giving. But water without a container, without a riverbed or a ceramic cup or an aqueduct, it just spills into the dirt and dissipates into mud. Its utility is totally lost.
Yes, it needs boundaries.
And furthermore, the structural nature of the cup dictates your relationship to the water.
How so?
Well, think about it. If you pour boiling hot water into a very delicate crystal glass, the container might shatter. But if you pour it into a heavy cast iron kettle, the container absorbs and radiates the heat.
So the vessel dictates the behavior of the vitality.
Exactly. That physical parallel is what the SEC model applies to human consciousness. In this framework, your containers are the psychological and environmental structures of your life.
So my thoughts are containers.
Your core identity, your self-concept, the meaning you assign to your suffering, your sacred relationships. These are not just abstract ideas. They function as literal, subtle energy vessels.
That is heavy. So when you interrogate your core beliefs, you are actively examining the structural integrity of the container holding your life force.
You are checking the walls of the vessel for leaks. Yes.
The cross-cultural comparisons the author uses to prove this functional equivalence are fascinating.
They really are. Where does he start?
He starts by examining the early Christian and Greek concept of pneuma.
Oh, pneuma is a deeply complex term. Historically, it translates to breath or wind or spirit.
Right. But in the context of early Christian theology, and even Stoic philosophy, it represents the animating presence of the divine organizing the physical world.
So how does the Spectrix framework translate that functionally?
It says pneuma acts as a spiritual architecture. It is the divine container through which higher-order influence manifests and actually stabilizes within the human vessel.
It gives the spirit a shape to hold on to.
Exactly. And then the text moves to Judaism, exploring the Hebrew concept of nephesh. And honestly, this completely short-circuited my usual way of thinking.
Why is that?
Well, in Western thought, which is heavily influenced by Descartes, we usually default to mind-body dualism. We think of the soul as this ghostly possession driving a meat suit.
Right, the ghost in the machine.
Yeah, we say, I have a soul, the exact same way we say, I have a car. But the text points out that in the ancient understanding of nephesh, a human being doesn't possess a nephesh. The human being is the nephesh.
Oh, wow. That is a profound philosophical distinction. It completely eliminates the separation between the vessel and the vitality.
Right. Nephesh refers to the holistic, breathing, animated person. The flesh, the breath, the desires, and the actions are all inextricably bound together.
Containment is identity. You are the vessel.
The implications of that are just staggering to me. If you do not own a container, but you are the container, then every physical action matters energetically.
Absolutely. How you nourish your physical body, the posture you hold while you're working, the environment you subject your nervous system to, none of that is separate from your spiritual vitality. You are literally maintaining the walls of the vessel.
And the framework pushes this concept even further when it analyzes the Islamic concept of baraka.
Baraka, right. That usually indicates a flow of divine blessing or sacred abundance. Transmitted grace.
Yes, but from the perspective of containment, what makes baraka so unique is its ecological application.
Ecological, meaning it's outside the body.
Exactly. It is not confined to the boundaries of the human epidermis. Baraka can be held by specific physical locations, objects, temporal moments, or even collective actions.
So a physical space, like a living room or a community center, can functionally act as a container for this vitality.
Precisely. And this framing forces us to view containment relationally. You are not just building internal psychological vessels, you are constantly constructing external environmental vessels.
So the architecture of your physical home is a container.
Yes.
The routine of a weekly family dinner is a container. The specific dynamic of a marriage is a container.
It's all structural accounting. And the text draws similar parallels with the Lakota concept of Wakan too.
The great mystery, or living power permeating reality.
Right, where the ultimate container is the interconnected cosmic web of nature itself. And in Hinduism, it references the pranakosha.
Ah, the nested sheaths.
Yeah, it conceptualizes the human being as a series of nested sheaths, like Russian dolls, starting from the gross physical body all the way up to the bliss body, with each sheath acting as a successive container for vital force.
By aligning Pneuma, Nefesh, Baraka, and Pranakosha, Dr. Johnson really demonstrates the power of this meta-model. The specific theologies remain completely distinct, but the functional reality is identical.
Human vitality demands an organizing structure to stabilize its expression.
Right, and if I apply that to the everyday experience of the listener, this is an incredibly practical diagnostic tool.
How so?
Well, if you are constantly feeling drained, exhausted, or emotionally depleted, the first diagnostic step isn't necessarily to go out and seek more energy.
Which is what we usually do.
Yeah.
Drink more coffee, read another self-help book.
Exactly. But the first step should actually be to audit your containers. What is the structural integrity of the story you tell yourself about your worth?
Oh, that's good.
Is your self-concept a watertight vessel? Or is it riddled with the fractures of chronic self-doubt, constantly leaking your vitality?
You're losing mana through the cracks.
Look at your workspace. Is the physical environment structured to hold your focus, or is it designed to drain it?
It reframes exhaustion completely. It's not a lack of fuel, it's a failure of containment.
Exactly. However, as the text notes, securing the container is only the first half of the equation.
Right, because if my container is completely sealed, I've basically just built a prison for my energy.
Yeah.
If I pour water into a watertight steel vault and lock the door, the water doesn't thrive in there. It stagnates. It becomes toxic. At some point, the pressure has to build up.
Yeah.
So how does the model account for the fact that energy has to go somewhere?
This functional necessity introduces the second face of the subtle energy cube, conductors.
Chapter 5, right?
Yes. Chapter 5 is dedicated entirely to the mechanisms of movement. And the text provides a really strong governing maxim here. Containment without movement produces stagnation. Movement without containment produces dissipation.
So a healthy, subtle energy system relies on the perpetual tension between the two.
Precisely. We see this biological imperative everywhere. A beating heart is useless without the complex highway system of veins and arteries.
Right. A supercomputer processor requires fiber optic cables and copper traces on a motherboard to move the data.
Vitality requires a designated pathway to transit from an origin point to an expression point.
And the author codifies this movement through what he calls the principle of dynamic reciprocity.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means vital energy in a living system does not behave like a bullet fired from a gun, traveling in a straight line until it just loses momentum and drops.
Okay.
It behaves much more like an alternating electrical current. It oscillates, it flows outward to exert influence, and it must adapt and return to the system to maintain equilibrium.
Dynamic reciprocity. It has to come back.
Exactly. Let's look at how the global traditions map these pathways. And let's start with perhaps the most globally recognized system of subtle conduction, traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM.
Right. In TCM, you have the foundational concept of qi, the animating life force, but the entire medical paradigm is built on the understanding that qi must circulate continuously.
It travels through a highly specific map network.
The primary pathway is known as meridians.
Yes, and when you view TCM through the lens of conductors, it completely demystifies practices like acupuncture.
I was just thinking that the acupuncturist isn't some magician conjuring ethereal energy from the ether.
No, they are, functionally speaking, subtle energy plumbers.
Plumbers, yes?
They are palpating the system to find where the qi has encountered a resistance block in the meridian pipeline. And they're using the needle to release the pressure and restore the natural circulatory flow.
It is a profound system of mapping resistance, and remarkably, we see an almost functionally identical map emerge in ancient Hinduism.
The nadis.
Yes. They track the movement of prana, the vital force, through an intricate web of channels called nadis. The yogic texts describe tens of thousands of these pathways.
But they focus heavily on three primary vertical conductors, right?
The Ida, the Pingala, and the central Sushumna.
The fact that two massive, historically isolated civilizations developed independent, incredibly granular maps of invisible energetic highways running through the human anatomy. It is just staggering.
They use different cultural vernacular, meridians and nadies, but the functional mechanics of conduction are exactly the same.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because this is where the Spectrix text takes a highly ambitious lead.
It does. It transitions from comparative mythology and philosophy into the realm of anomalous scientific anatomy.
Yes. The author introduces the hypothesis of the premovascular system, or PVS.
Now, I want to tread carefully here because the text itself includes a very stark disclaimer about this.
Right. We need to be clear about that.
The premovascular system is not a settled textbook fact in mainstream biomedical science. It is highly controversial and currently exists on the fringe of anatomical acceptance.
But as a conceptual bridge, it is absolutely fascinating.
But the context is essential. So the PVS was first proposed in the early 1960s by a North Korean researcher named Bong-han Kim.
Right.
Traditional anatomy recognizes two primary circulatory networks, the cardiovascular system for blood and the lymphatic system.
Right.
Kim claimed to have discovered a literal physical third circulatory network. He described it as a web of... Exactly. Now, the controversy stems from the fact that Kim's original research was notoriously difficult to replicate, partly due to the geopolitical isolation of his lab and the specific highly specialized staining techniques required to allegedly make these translucent structures visible under a microscope.
So mainstream science largely dismissed it for decades.
They did. However, in recent years, with the advent of advanced bioimaging and novel fluorescent dyes, some independent research teams have claimed to observe structures that match Kim's descriptions. So it's reopening the debate.
And the text isn't demanding we accept EVS as hard scientific dogma, is it?
No, not at all. Rather, it uses the PVS to point out that the boundary between subjective energetic description and objective anatomical reality might be an illusion caused by the limitations of our current imaging technology.
What the ancients felt subjectively and mapped conceptually might eventually be physically photographed.
Precisely. But even if we strip away the anatomical debate entirely and focus purely on the psychological application, the concept of conductors is incredibly revealing.
Oh, definitely. Let's apply the principle of dynamic reciprocity to human behavior.
Consider a person who feels entirely stuck in their life. Perhaps they are a mid-level manager who is completely burned out, chronically exhausted, and deeply resentful of their team.
The standard cultural response is to blame the fuel source. We tell them they need a vacation, or more coffee, or better sleep. We assume the container is empty.
But the SEC model asks us to examine the flow. Often, the burnout of a chronic giver is not an empty container, it is a severed return line.
Wow, a severed return line.
They are constantly conducting energy outward, managing crises, supporting friends, doing the work of their subordinates, but they have psychological blockages that prevent them from receiving.
They reject compliments, they refuse to delegate, they feel guilty resting.
Exactly. They have broken the dynamic reciprocity of the circuit. The energy is hemorrhaging outward, and nothing is returning to recharge the system.
That distinction alone is worth the price of admission. It forces you to ask, am I truly empty, or are my pipes just heavily congested with resistance?
It changes everything about how you treat the burnout.
But my concern with this is that flow and structure alone only explain the plumbing. And if we look at human experience, plumbing isn't enough.
No, it's not.
It doesn't explain why the water in the pipes is sometimes boiling hot, sometimes freezing cold, and sometimes highly acidic. My subjective experience of energy feels fundamentally different when I am terrified versus when I am intensely creative.
Right, the flavor of the energy.
Exactly. We need to talk about the mechanisms of intensity and flavor.
The framework addresses this exact gap with the third functional face of the cube, capacitors.
Chapter 6.
Yes. Chapter 6 defines capacitors as the specific regulatory centers where raw vitality is concentrated, modulated, and transformed into distinct phenomenological states.
To really understand this, I think we need to look at how a literal physical capacitor works in electrical engineering.
Go for it.
A battery generates a steady, low-level flow of power. But a capacitor stores that electrical charge up, concentrating it, and then releases it in a highly regulated, intense burst like the flash of a camera.
Right.
The text is suggesting our internal energy system has these exact regulatory flashpoints.
And to explain how these flashpoints create the flavor of our emotions, the author expands the earlier philosophical concept of the spiritual prism. He turns it into an actual mechanical theory called the prism hypothesis.
The text argues that raw, subtle vitality, the baseline ki or prana, is functionally uniform, like pure white light.
Yes.
But as this raw vitality travels through our internal conductors, it impacts these regulatory capacitors. The structure of the capacitor acts like a prism. It slows the raw energy down, bends it, and fractures it into distinct frequencies.
So the pure white light hits a specific capacitor and is translated into the distinct, localized frequency of survival fear.
Or it hits a different capacitor and becomes the frequency of unconditional love.
To map these specific frequencies, the text utilizes the concept of the 7 chakras from ancient Vedic and Tantric traditions.
But again, Dr. Johnson is not using the chakras as mystical, abstract buzzwords.
No, he translates them rigorously into functional, regulatory centers of intensity.
Let's rigorously test that logic and walk through these centers.
Okay, let's start at the base.
The text starts at the base of the spine with the root chakra. In the SEC framework, this isn't just a glowing red wheel. It is the foundation of containment.
Yes. The root capacitor regulates the lowest, densest frequency of human experience: physical survival, grounding, and material stability.
So when you are panicked about paying your rent or you feel physically unsafe in an environment,
raw vitality is surging through this specific capacitor, generating the intense, heavy frequency of the fight-or-flight response.
Okay, moving up into the lower abdomen, we hit the sacral chakra. The text defines this as the capacitor regulating relational expression, pleasure, and raw creativity.
Right. When a musician is lost in a flow state writing a song, or when you experience deep physical intimacy, the vitality has shifted frequencies.
The sacral capacitor is modulating the energy into a highly dynamic, connective resonance.
Exactly. Then we reach the solar plexus in the upper abdomen. This is the capacitor of agency, personal will, and identity formation.
This is your engine of self-determination.
It is. If you are advocating fiercely for a promotion at work or setting a hard boundary with a toxic family member, you are concentrating energy here to project your will into the world.
Moving upward, we encounter the heart chakra in the center of the chest. The framework designates this as the critical coherence center.
Functionally, it acts as the bridge between the denser, lower frequencies of physical survival and the higher, refined frequencies of cognition and transcendence.
It regulates the frequency of compassion, integration, and holistic balance.
Above that, the throat chakra, the capacitor of transmission.
This regulates how we convert our internal truth into external reality through language, art, and authentic expression.
Then we move up to the brow chakra, or the third eye.
Right. The text frames this as the center of informational processing, regulating intuition, pattern recognition, and nonlinear insight.
And finally, hovering just above the physical head, the crown chakra. The framework calls this the divine interface.
It is the capacitor that regulates our connection to transcendent states, unity consciousness, and the realities that exist beyond the closed system of the individual ego.
Oh, okay, that's the map.
Okay, I have a major philosophical pushback here.
Let's hear it.
This all sounds incredibly neat, organized, and positive creativity, love, insight. But what about dark stuff?
The negative emotions?
Yeah. The text briefly references concepts like louche, a term from fringe esoteric circles used to describe a parasitic, dark, heavy emotional energy generated by extreme fear, rage, or despair.
It does mention that.
If these capacitors are just neutral regulators, how does the model handle bad energy? Should I be actively trying to shut off my root or solar plexus when I feel terrified or furiously angry to avoid generating this toxic frequency?
That is a critical concern, and the text addresses the moral judgment of energy head-on. The author explicitly distances the framework from the more paranoid ontological claims regarding louche and parasitic energy harvesting.
Oh, good.
Yeah. The SEC model reframes the entire concept of negative emotion. It argues emphatically that intensity itself is not inherently harmful, and there is no such thing as fundamentally evil energy within the human system.
So it's less about the moral quality of the energy and more about the mechanics of how we handle it.
Precisely. The text posits that emotional states, even the agonizing ones like grief, terror, or rage, are fundamentally information.
They're just data.
They are data packets carried on a specific energetic frequency. Anger is a surge of energy through the solar plexus, informing you that a boundary has been violated.
Fear is a surge through the root, informing you of a threat to your physical container.
So the goal is not to eliminate the negative frequencies.
The goal of a healthy, subtle energy system is regulation, not eradication.
The danger is not the anger itself. The danger is what the text calls energetic congestion.
Let's bring back the plumbing analogy.
Please do.
If I feel an intense surge of anger because someone betrayed me, that is a massive volume of high-pressure water blasting through the solar plexus capacitor.
Yeah.
If I judge that anger as bad or unspiritual, and I try to violently clamp down on the valve to repress it, the energy doesn't just vanish into the ether.
It cannot vanish. It congests. The high-pressure vitality backs up into the system. It strains the walls of the container, causing physical tension and psychological brittleness.
It blocks the conductors, preventing the dynamic flow of reciprocity.
The energetic discipline is to allow the capacitor to do its job.
Yeah.
Let the intense energy enter, extract the vital information it carries. Why am I angry? What action must I take? And then release the pressure, allowing the energy to flow back out into the system.
That is incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
It removes the shame from our emotional life.
Completely.
You aren't harboring toxic demons. You are simply managing a high-frequency surge that requires structural regulation.
If you are experiencing massive anxiety, it means you are likely processing an overwhelming amount of raw energy in the brow capacitor, endless looping thoughts, and overanalysis.
Without grounding that energy, by opening the valve in the root capacitor to stabilize yourself, you are energetically top-heavy.
And this realization is what transitions the entire text from a descriptive philosophy into an applied technology.
We now have the three mechanical components: containers holding the vitality, conductors moving the vitality, and capacitors regulating the intensity.
But Dr. Johnson did not just write a list. He built a 3D architecture. He assembled them into the subtle energy cube.
Why a cube specifically? Why not a flat flowchart, a pyramid, or a sphere?
The geometric choice of the cube is deeply intentional. A cube inherently possesses 6 distinct faces. Each face offers a completely different visual perspective, a different angle of approach, yet all 6 faces belong to the exact same continuous integrated volume.
Right.
By placing the capacitors on the faces of the cube, mapping the conductors as bidirectional arrows between them, and placing the crown above the structure, he forces the reader to confront the multidimensional nature of human experience.
Which leads to Chapter 7, which introduces the core diagnostic methodology of the entire document, spinning the cube.
Spinning the cube is the applied practice of realizing that your perspective on a problem must remain dynamic. Because human suffering is multi-axis, a single ailment can and must be viewed through multiple faces of the framework.
Let me test that logic with a specific everyday example. Let's look at chronic anxiety.
Okay.
If I take my chronic anxiety to a cognitive behavioral therapist, they will view it through the lens of my internal narratives. They will say my anxiety is a maladaptive cognitive state, a flaw in the meaning I'm assigning to reality.
Yes.
If I take that same anxiety to a general practitioner, they will look at a blood test and say it is a physiological stress response, a measurable spike in cortisol and adrenaline.
True.
If I go to a priest or a spiritual director, they might frame it as an existential crisis, a disconnection from divine meaning. And if I go to a traditional acupuncturist, they will diagnose a stagnation of qi in a specific meridian.
And the standard Western impulse is to force a battle of supremacy here.
We demand to know.
Yeah.
Which expert is objectively correct and which ones are pseudoscientific charlatans.
And the Spectrix framework sidesteps the battle entirely. It says they are all correct.
They're simply describing different faces of the exact same phenomena.
Anxiety is a crack in the container's meaning, and D, a blockage in the conductor's flow, and D, an overconcentration of frequency in a capacitor, and D, a spike in physiological cortisol.
To borrow an analogy, imagine purchasing a historic home. You are sitting in the living room, and there's a freezing, uncomfortable draft.
Okay.
You hire a plumber who inspects the basement and declares, your radiator pipes are corroded and failing to conduct hot water. This is a plumbing crisis.
Makes sense.
You hire an electrician who checks the thermostat and says, the wiring is short-circuiting, the boiler isn't receiving the signal, this is an electrical crisis.
Right.
You hire a structural architect who points out that the window frame is rotted and letting in the winter wind. This is a structural crisis.
They are all making accurate observations based on their highly specialized training.
But if you blindly follow the plumber and rip out all the pipes, you'll still be freezing if the window is broken.
Spinning the cube is the practice of mentally walking around the entire perimeter of the house before you start demolishing walls.
I love that. And the framework provides a literal map showing how various existing therapeutic modalities target specific faces of the cube. It categorizes these interventions as rotations.
So if a listener engages in neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, to reframe their limiting beliefs, how does the model classify that?
NLP is classified as a cognitive rotation. You are directly targeting the integrity of the containers. You are rebuilding the psychological meaning that holds your life force.
And if someone is using a technology like HeartMath, which uses biometric sensors to help you sync your breath with your heart rate variability to reduce stress,
That is categorized as a coherence rotation. You are using physiological feedback to target a specific capacitor of the heart center, to regulate emotional intensity and force the system into a harmonized frequency.
what about somatic therapies like EFT tapping, where you physically tap on acupressure points while verbally affirming an emotional trauma?
EFT tapping represents a tactile rotation. It operates precisely at the physical intersection of the conductors, the meridian pathways, and the cognitive containers.
And what about subtle energy work, like Reiki, which doesn't necessarily involve physical touch or cognitive dialogue?
Reiki and similar modalities are mapped as an intentional rotation. The practitioner is utilizing their own trained focus to facilitate movement in the client's conductors and stabilize their containers, operating purely on the subtle energetic axis.
Physical breath work, conversely, is a physiological rotation, manipulating the physical respiratory system to force a change in the subtle conductors.
The beauty of this is that the Spectrix framework isn't trying to replace your therapist, your doctor, or your energy worker.
No, it is providing you with a master schematic so you understand why a therapy works, and more importantly, why it might not be working.
If you've been doing cognitive therapy for years and your anxiety won't budge, your container might be fine. It might be time to spin the cube and try a physiological rotation to clear the conductors.
This functional pragmatism leads us directly into Chapter 8, where the author's accounting background truly shines.
Yes. He introduces a concept derived from Polynesian culture known as mana, and he uses it to build a system he calls energetic accounting.
Energetic accounting, the ultimate synthesis of metaphysical philosophy and the spreadsheet ledger. What exactly is mana in this specific context?
Well, in traditional Polynesian cultures, mana is a complex concept representing spiritual power, authority, and efficacy.
Right.
But structurally, what makes mana so vital to the SEC framework is that it functions economically. It is a quantifiable resource.
It can be accumulated through right action, it can be transferred between individuals, it can be severely depleted by poor choices, and it requires careful stewardship.
It treats vitality not as an abstract mood that magically descends upon you, but as an investable, finite currency.
Exactly. When you adopt the mindset of energetic accounting, your entire relationship to your daily behavior changes.
Yeah.
You recognize that you are making continuous economic choices with your subtle resources.
Let's apply this to a highly relatable modern scenario. Imagine an average Tuesday.
Okay, an average Tuesday.
You endure an incredibly toxic, passive-aggressive meeting with your boss. You finally get home, you are totally exhausted, and you collapse onto the couch.
I've been there.
Instead of resting, you pull out your phone and spend 2 hours doom-scrolling through enraging political news and comparing your life to highly curated influencers on social media.
From an energetic accounting perspective, we can audit that evening. The toxic meeting with your boss demanded a massive expenditure of mana to maintain the boundaries of your solar plexus capacitor, your professional composure.
You arrived home with a depleted ledger.
And instead of engaging in an activity that provides a return on investment like cooking a nourishing meal, going for a walk, or having a meaningful conversation, which would actively recharge your conductors and strengthen your containers,
You chose to invest your remaining mana into the digital equivalent of a black hole.
doom scrolling demands intense informational processing from the brow capacitor, while simultaneously flooding the root capacitor with the low-frequency static of existential dread from the news cycle.
You are bleeding your currency into a fractured container. You wake up the next morning feeling physically rested, but energetically bankrupt.
It puts you, the listener, squarely in the driver's seat. You are no longer just a passive victim of bad vibes in the universe. You are the chief financial officer of your own vitality. You have to balance the ledger.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this concept of personal agency culminates in the final and undoubtedly the most ambitious section of Dr. Johnson's framework.
The Spectrix Energy Continuum Model, or the SCCM.
This is where the text tackles the ultimate cultural divide. For the last century, the materialist scientific worldview and the subjective spiritual worldview have basically been standing on opposite sides of a massive canyon throwing rocks at each other.
The hardcore materialists claim the spiritualists are delusional and ignoring biology, while the spiritualists claim the materialists are spiritually dead and ignoring consciousness.
The SCCM proposes a radical ceasefire. It hypothesizes that the subjective subtle realm and the objective material realm are not isolated warring dimensions. They exist on a single, continuous, interacting spectrum.
The author maps this continuum across 5 distinct interacting zones.
We need to spend some serious time unpacking these zones because this is the operational core of the continuum. Let's start at the absolute top of the spectrum, Zone 1.
Zone 1 is defined as the domain of divine and subtle intent. This is the realm of pure, unmanifest potential.
It encompasses the highest frequencies of prayer, deep contemplative states, transcendent meaning, and non-local consciousness.
In physics terms, you might align this with the theoretical quantum vacuum, the underlying field from which all reality emerges.
Moving down the continuum, we hit Zone 2, informational fields.
As the pure intent of Zone 1 descends, it must take on structure. Zone 2 represents the subtle architecture of the mind.
This is where our deep subconscious beliefs, our psychological narratives, and our conceptual paradigms exist. It is the realm of data and meaning before it becomes physical action.
And here is where it gets tricky, because Zone 3 is where the invisible starts touching the physical. The text calls Zone 3 the biofield interface.
The biofield interface is the crucial transitionary layer. This zone encompasses the phenomena that bridge the gap, the human aura, the energetic aspects of the chakras, as mapped by the capacitors.
And emerging concepts in quantum biology, like biophoton emission. It is the scaffolding that translates informational instructions into biological blueprints.
Then we cross fully into the material world with Zone 4, physiological and electromagnetic systems.
This is the domain of measurable textbook biology and neuroscience. Brainwave states captured on an EEG, heart rate variability measured by an EKG, the firing of neurotransmitters, galvanic skin response, hormonal cascades.
This is the dense physical machinery of the human body responding to the subtle instructions from the zones above it.
Finally, we reach the densest layer, Zone 5, classical energy systems. This is the realm of Newtonian physics. Electricity, thermal heat, acoustic sound waves, mechanical force, and classical electromagnetic engineering.
The profound hypothesis of the SECM is not simply that these 5 zones exist, but that they interact dynamically and continuously. They are engaged in a process of mutual translation.
The text uses a specific engineering term for this translation between the invisible and the physical. It calls it transduction.
I want to break down the mechanics of transduction because if this is true, it changes everything.
In classical electrical engineering, a transducer is a device that converts one form of energy into another entirely different form.
The microphone we are speaking into right now is a transducer.
It is. It captures the physical kinetic energy of acoustic sound waves moving through the air, and it converts that kinetic energy into an electrical signal that travels down a copper wire.
The speaker in your headphones performs the exact reverse transduction. It takes that electrical signal and converts it back into physical sound wave.
The Spectrix framework is arguing that the human being is the ultimate biological transducer.
The subtle scientific energy nexus is the point where our subjective Zone 1 intentions are literally converted into measurable Zone 4 physiological reality.
Let us trace a complete act of transduction down the continuum. Imagine sitting in a quiet room and generating a profound subjective feeling of deep gratitude and compassion.
That event originates in Zone 1 as pure, subtle intent.
That intent moves into Zone 2, structuring your cognitive field with a narrative of safety and abundance.
As it hits Zone 3, the biofield interface, the heart capacitor, regulates that frequency into coherence.
Which transduces directly into Zone 4 physiology. The vagus nerve is stimulated, cortisol levels plummet, DHEA, the vitality hormone, increases.
The electrical rhythm of the physical heart smooths out into a measurable sine wave on an EKG monitor. A purely invisible subjective thought has just engineered a measurable biochemical alteration of physical matter.
And the model insists this flows in both directions. You can start in Zone 5, the dense physical world, and transduce upward.
If I apply a very specific Zone 5 acoustic frequency, say, a binaural beat, playing through headphones, that sound wave transduces into the Zone 4 physiological auditory cortex,
altering your brainwaves, which shifts your Zone 2 cognitive state, ultimately inducing a Zone 1 experience of transcendent meditation.
The boundary between the physical and the spiritual is not a brick wall. It is a permeable, translating interface.
This realization strips away the illusion of our own passivity. We are not merely inhabiting a physical body while a disconnected spiritual life floats somewhere above us. The continuum dictates that every system is in constant dialogue.
We have mapped an incredible amount of territory today. We started with the foundational mystery, the invisible spark that animates the human body.
We explored how Dr. Johnson utilized artificial intelligence to map the vectors of thousands of years of human thought, avoiding the trap of cultural reductionism by employing the spiritual prism.
We examined the three primary mechanical functions that emerged from that global data. We looked at containers, the psychological and physical structures, the nephesh and the baraka that hold and shape our vitality.
We looked at conductors, the dynamic pathways of meridians and nadis that demand the continuous flow of reciprocity to prevent stagnation.
And we explored capacitors, the regulatory chakra centers that act as prisms, modulating the raw white light of our energy into the distinct, colorful frequencies of survival, will, and insight, without judging the intense emotions as inherently toxic.
We walked around the 3D architecture of the subtle energy cube, learning how to spin the geometry so we don't get trapped in a single, dogmatic perspective when trying to heal our anxieties.
We embrace the Polynesian wisdom of mana, accepting our responsibility as the accountants of our own energetic ledgers.
And we concluded with the Spectrix energy continuum model, observing how the human organism acts as a miraculous transducer, constantly converting the invisible poetry of our intentions into the hard prose of our biology, and vice versa.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we have to ask, what does this grand architectural theory mean for you sitting in your car or walking your dog or commuting to work right now?
The text leaves us with a profound, unavoidable implication. If the continuum is real and the interface is active, then your inner life is not a private, inconsequential theater.
Every thought you hold, every boundary you reinforce, every emotional state you allow to congest in your capacitors is a literal act of engineering.
Your focused attention is a force that shapes matter. You are transducing reality in real time every second of your existence.
That invisible vitality, the pneuma, the chi, the prana, it isn't just an ancient metaphor in a dusty textbook. It is the raw, vibrating material of your immediate experience.
As you step out of this deep dive and back into the friction of your daily life, the framework leaves you with one final structural question.
What are you choosing to engineer with your vitality today?
It is a question that demands we stay curious, keep spinning the cube, and audit our choices with rigorous compassion.
Thank you all for joining us on this exploration of the Spectrix subtle energy cube. Keep checking the integrity of your containers, keep your conductors flowing, and keep exploring the incredible architecture of your own subtle energy. We will catch you on the next one.